Know your place, boy. The words cracked through the courtroom just an instant before Officer James Carter's palm did. His hand lashed across the black man's face with a vicious snap that echoed against the stone walls and vaulted ceiling, a sound that silenced the low hum of conversation and froze every body in place. The man's head jerked with the blow, a red mark already swelling across his cheek. Blood rushed beneath the skin, hot and humiliating, but he did not flinch further. He held himself still, his breath steady, though his jaw clenched ever so slightly. The sting of the slap reverberated through his bones, but his dignity remained unbroken. Carter loomed above him, tall and broad in his pressed uniform, his mirrored sunglasses reflecting the stunned faces around the chamber. Steam curled lazily from the paper coffee cup in his free hand, a strange, almost casual counterpoint to the violence he had just delivered. He sneered, the corner of his mouth twisting with contempt. "Defense table is for real lawyers," he spat, his voice carrying easily in the hushed room, "not janitors." With a deliberate flick of his wrist, Carter shoved the man's briefcase from the polished oak table. The latch snapped, and papers erupted like a flock of startled birds, scattering in all directions. Legal documents skidded across the marble floor, case notes fluttered beneath chairs, and one small framed family photograph spun out of sight, sliding under a wooden bench. Gasps rose from the gallery. A young woman in the back row covered her mouth with both hands. The bailiff's fingers hovered inches from his radio, torn between training and paralysis. The court clerk, normally composed and mechanical, looked as if she might faint, her wide eyes fixed on the officer towering over the man he had struck. The black man's hands trembled faintly, but his breath came slow and deep, measured. He did not bend to the floor. He did not gather the scattered fragments of his life. He straightened his tie instead, smoothing the silk knot with deliberate calm. Then, as if time itself slowed to watch, he rose. Every eye tracked him as he stood to his full height. The room seemed to shrink. The chatter and coughs and footsteps of a moment ago utterly vanished. Without a word, he turned, not toward the gallery as Carter expected, not toward the papers strewn like debris, but toward the bench. He climbed the steps with a quiet authority that no one present could quite comprehend, his polished shoes clicking softly on the wood. Reaching the top, he extended his hand, not to shield himself, not to strike back, but to touch the gavel resting in solemn silence beside the judge's chair. The gallery stiffened as one. Somewhere near the door, a throat cleared nervously. The bailiff took one uncertain step forward. "Pick that up," Carter barked, his voice dropping low and dangerous, the words echoing in the fragile silence. He pointed to the papers with his coffee cup. "Now." The man turned his head slowly, meeting the officer's glare with a calm, unyielding stare. The silence of the courtroom pressed down like a physical weight. Every spectator, every attorney, even the bailiff by the door, seemed trapped in the gravity of the moment. The black man's stillness only sharpened the tension, as though he were daring time itself to move. Carter narrowed his eyes behind the dark glass of his sunglasses, his jaw tightening. The stranger's refusal to obey, his calm defiance in the face of humiliation, stoked the officer's anger like dry tinder meeting flame. He stepped closer, close enough that the steam from his coffee curled between them. "You're not hearing me," Carter said, his tone deceptively quiet, each word bitten off with the precision of a threat. "This area is for authorized personnel only." The man did not look away. His voice, when it came, was steady and even. "I am authorized to be here." A ripple of disbelief rustled through the gallery. Several spectators exchanged glances, uncertain, as though waiting for a punchline that never came. Carter tilted his head, the sneer returning to his lips. "Then let's see some ID." "I don't believe that's necessary." The refusal landed like another slap, this time to Carter's pride. His posture stiffened, his free hand drifting instinctively toward the holster at his hip. He didn't unclip the strap, didn't draw his weapon, but the implication was there, heavy and dangerous. "Last chance, buddy," Carter said, his voice dropping into a growl that carried across the room. Move to the gallery or show me credentials. From the side aisle, Assistant District Attorney Laura Bennett entered, a slim leather portfolio in her arms. She froze at the sight of the confrontation, her eyes darting between the officer she worked with so often and the calm, unknown figure standing his ground. "James," she said carefully, lowering her voice, "we should prepare." "1 second, Laura." Carter cut her off without breaking eye contact with the man before him. His hand went up, silencing her, as though she were no more than background noise. "Just making sure everyone's where they should be." Bennett's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. The stranger rose to his full height, matching Carter's imposing frame. His tone was cool, measured, but there was steel beneath it. "Officer, I suggest you focus on your testimony rather than courtroom seating arrangements." Carter bristled. "How do you know I'm an officer?" "Your badge is visible," the man replied evenly, "and you carry yourself with the unfortunate arrogance I've seen in many officers." Gasps escaped from the gallery. Bennett inhaled sharply. Even the bailiff took another step forward, his hand twitching near the radio clipped to his belt. "You got something against law enforcement, friend?" Carter asked, closing the last inches between them, his voice low, his breath laced with coffee and menace. "I have something against anyone who misuses authority." The air seemed to crackle with invisible static. Conversations that had begun in the back of the room stuttered and died. Spectators entering the courtroom slowed their steps, their eyes drawn inevitably to the center of the brewing storm. The clerk at the side desk, recognizing danger, slipped quickly out the door, whispering urgently to the bailiff posted outside. "You know what?" Carter muttered, his irritation boiling into action. "I don't have time for this." He reached across the table, seizing the stranger's briefcase with a sudden violent tug. The latch gave way again, spilling more papers in a messy cascade. Case files, notes, reports, all scattered to the floor like discarded debris. A simple family photo slid out once more, clattering against the marble, the smiling faces trapped behind glass now an unintentional witness to the chaos. "James," Bennett hissed, mortified, her voice sharp with alarm, "stop this right now." But Carter only scoffed, using his boot to nudge the fallen papers farther across the floor. "Court documents? Please, and I'm the Attorney General." He gave a derisive laugh, then kicked the photo, sending it skittering beneath a bench again. The courtroom doors opened wider as more attorneys and spectators entered, only to freeze in confusion and discomfort at the scene unfolding before them. Normal pretrial chatter died on lips. An uneasy stillness settled over the room. "Pick those up," Carter ordered, pointing at the papers scattered across the floor. His voice rose loud enough for everyone to hear. "Now." The man did not move. Carter's laugh was incredulous, sharp with disbelief. "No, no, you don't get to say no to me." He stepped closer, lowering his voice into a dangerous growl. "I said pick them up." The bailiff approached, hesitant but firm. "Officer Carter, perhaps stay out of this." "Stay out of this?" Carter snapped, without sparing the bailiff a glance. His eyes remained locked on the stranger. This man needs to learn respect for proper procedure. The man took a deep breath, his calm presence a deliberate counterweight to the officer's fury. "What you're doing has nothing to do with procedure." "Kneel down and pick up your mess," Carter demanded, his voice echoing across the chamber. The crowd tensed, every spectator acutely aware they were watching something volatile, something dangerous. A woman in the back row raised her phone, recording, the red light blinking like a silent alarm. "I will not," the man said, his voice steady. Carter moved with sudden explosive force, his hand clamping down on the man's shoulder, shoving with the kind of pressure that came from years of making men obey. "I said kneel." Gasps rippled through the courtroom as the man resisted, then faltered under the officer's weight, forced down onto one knee. The sound of disbelief and outrage spread like wildfire through the gallery. Someone whispered, "Jesus Christ." "There we go," Carter said with grim satisfaction. "Now collect your things and get out of my courtroom." While still pinned on one knee, the man reached slowly into the inside pocket of his jacket. His movement was calm, deliberate, but the strain across his face betrayed the pressure of Carter's grip. "Hands where I can see them," Carter barked, twisting the arm harder, the command loud and sharp. "I'm reaching for my identification," the man replied, voice steady despite the wince of pain. "Sure you are." Carter yanked his arm behind his back with a practiced twist, forcing him further forward. "Maybe a night in lockup will improve your attitude." The bailiff took another step forward, voice firmer now. "Officer Carter, I really think—" "Cuff him," Carter snapped, cutting him off, eyes still burning into the man before him. "Obstruction of justice, resisting an officer." The bailiff froze, caught between duty and conscience. His eyes flicked between Carter's clenched jaw and the man's calm, unflinching stare. The courtroom had gone deathly silent, the kind of silence that comes before catastrophe. Every witness felt the tension, the weight of injustice unfolding in plain sight. And then, from the back of the chamber, a voice cut through the air like a blade. "What time is it, Mr. Evans?" The question hung strangely in the charged stillness. The court clerk, startled, glanced at his watch. 9:17, Your Honor." Every head turned at once toward the double doors, which now stood open. Chief Judge Margaret Hayes entered, her black robes flowing like a tide of authority, her silver hair gleaming in the morning light. She moved with a dignity that filled the room, her expression carved from stone. "Release that man immediately, officer," she commanded, her voice carrying the weight of decades on the bench. Carter hesitated, his fingers still clamped around the stranger's wrist. "Judge Hayes, this individual—" "That individual," Hayes interrupted, her voice slicing cleanly through his protest, "is Judge Alan Brooks. He is presiding over this case." The words detonated like a bomb in the courtroom. Gasps burst from the gallery. The defense attorney at the far table dropped his pen. Bennett's hand flew to her mouth in shock. The bailiff's eyes widened, horror dawning as he realized the gravity of what had just happened. Carter's face drained of color. His grip faltered, and at last he stepped back, releasing the man he had forced to kneel. Judge Brooks rose slowly, carefully, as if every motion was measured not just for himself, but for the countless eyes locked upon him. He smoothed his tie, adjusted his jacket, and stood tall behind the bench. Not once did he glance at Carter. Not a single word of reproach left his lips. His silence was heavier than any curse. "Your Honor," Hayes addressed Brooks with a nod, her voice gentler now. "Do you require a recess?" Brooks shook his head once. His voice was calm, steady, almost unnervingly so. "That won't be necessary, Chief Judge. Thank you." "Very well." Hayes's gaze swept the room, pinning every officer, every clerk, every spectator in place. "I expect a full report on this incident." With that, she turned and exited, her presence lingering like the echo of a thunderclap. The room remained stunned, as if no one quite trusted what their own eyes had witnessed. Brooks gestured quietly to the bailiff. 10-minute recess. Officer Carter remains in the courtroom." Then he walked with dignified calm into his chambers, his robe still absent, but his authority undeniable. Behind him, the silence held like a fragile glass, every person too shaken to breathe too loudly, each of them realizing that they had just witnessed something historic. Inside the quiet of his chambers, the door clicking shut behind him, Judge Alan Brooks finally let the mask slip. His hands trembled faintly as he sank into the leather chair behind his desk. The adrenaline of the last 10 minutes still surged in his veins, leaving his chest tight, his breaths uneven. He pressed his palms flat against the desk, forcing steadiness into fingers that wanted to shake. The silence was deafening. The steady tick of the wall clock became a drumbeat in his ears, each second pounding out the memory of Carter's hand slamming across his face, the feel of rough fingers forcing him to his knees. For a moment, the weight of humiliation pressed down like lead. He closed his eyes, inhaled deeply, and exhaled even slower, willing composure back into his body. Finally, he reached for the phone. "Gerald," he said, his voice low but steady. "It's Will. I need you to pull some files for me. Everything you can find on Officer James Carter. Yes, from this district. Priority access." He listened for the brief confirmation, then ended the call. A knock at the door. The bailiff stepped in, concern etched across his face. "Your Honor, are you all right? Should I call for—" "I'm fine," Brooks interrupted gently but firmly. He straightened in his chair, the judge's authority sliding back into place like armor. "But I want you to contact Internal Affairs, quietly. Tell them to pull all of Officer Carter's arrest records for the past 5 years, particularly those involving minority suspects." The bailiff nodded, tension easing from his shoulders at the clarity of command. "Right away, sir." "And one more thing," Brooks added. "I want today's courthouse security footage preserved. All of it. Every angle." When the bailiff left, Brooks opened his laptop. His fingers hovered for a moment above the keys before he began typing a short, precise email to the Judicial Review Board. No formal complaint yet, just a notification, a marker, a signal that a potential pattern of misconduct warranted immediate attention. Finished, he sat back, then rose to his feet. From the small closet in the corner, he retrieved his judicial robe. He slid it over his shoulders with slow, deliberate care, the heavy fabric settling around him like a mantle of responsibility. In the mirror above his desk, his reflection stared back, no longer the nobody Carter had shoved to his knees, but the judge entrusted with dispensing justice. He studied his own face for a long moment, the same face Carter had looked at with such contempt, now framed by the solemn black of authority. "This isn't about you, Will," he whispered to his reflection. "It's about everyone who couldn't fight back." The weight of the robe steadied him. He straightened his collar, squared his shoulders, and turned toward the door. Beyond it, the courtroom waited, still buzzing with whispers, still replaying the shocking scene in their minds. When Judge Brooks returned, gavel in hand, the atmosphere shifted instantly. Officers stiffened, attorneys straightened, and spectators hushed. He climbed the bench and took his seat with quiet dignity, every step a reclamation of authority. "Court is now in session," he announced, his voice calm, even, unshaken. "State of Westlake versus Jordan Clark, possession with intent to distribute." And as Officer Carter fidgeted at the prosecution table, sweat gathering at his temples, the story of accountability had only just begun. When Judge Allen Brooks returned to the bench that morning, the courtroom was no longer a place of routine procedure. It had become a stage for reckoning. Officer Carter shifted at the prosecution table. The swagger that once defined him reduced to nervous glances and restless hands. His usual confidence in testifying faltered under Brooks's steady gaze. When asked why he had pulled over Jordan Clark, the defendant in the day's case, Carter muttered about a broken taillight. But when Brooks pressed about dash cam or body cam footage, Carter hesitated. Both, he claimed, had malfunctioned. The courtroom stirred, and defense counsel pounced. With Brooks allowing cross-examination into Carter's record, years of suspicious equipment failures came to light. The defense produced a damning pattern. Most of Carter's failed recordings and irregular arrests involved minorities. As if on cue, a new piece of evidence surfaced. Distant surveillance footage from a nearby business showing Carter searching Clark's car before ever citing the alleged traffic violation. Gasps echoed through the gallery. Sarah Bennett, the prosecutor, raised objections, but the damage was done. Carter's testimony was collapsing, his credibility eroding before the eyes of the very system that had once trusted him. His frustration boiled over. He accused Brooks of bias, of orchestrating a personal vendetta. But Brooks, calm and unwavering, reminded him, "Justice is always personal, to the accused, to the victim, to society. What it must never be is prejudiced." When Carter defied him one last time, Brooks declared him in contempt and had him removed from the courtroom. The fallout was immediate and swift. In his chambers, Brooks revealed his position on the Judicial Oversight Committee for Discriminatory Policing. Carter's name had appeared in reports for years, but today's public humiliation provided undeniable proof. Chief Judge Hayes and Police Commissioner Wright arrived within hours, confronting Carter directly. His 20 years of service could not shield him from the truth. Assaulting a sitting judge, falsifying testimony, and years of racially biased arrests. Wright suspended him on the spot,
stripping him of his badge and weapon, and announced a full review of all his cases.
The news spread like wildfire. By afternoon, courthouse security footage leaked online, replayed endlessly on news networks. Carter forcing a black judge to kneel. The image went viral, a symbol too powerful to ignore. Hashtags demanding accountability trended nationwide. Defense attorneys flooded the district attorney's office with motions to reopen Carter's past cases. Sarah Bennett, overwhelmed by the flood, ordered hundreds of files pulled for review. Many convictions collapsed within days, particularly those involving minority defendants. The police union scrambled. Some leaders argued they must defend Carter, a veteran officer. Others, recognizing the indefensibility of his actions, distanced themselves. Tension erupted behind closed doors, but the public's judgment was clear. Carter had become the face of a broken system. A disciplinary hearing followed within weeks. Internal Affairs Captain Lopez presented damning statistics. Carter's arrests of minorities were 4 times more likely to involve force. His evidence submissions riddled with irregularities. His camera malfunctions almost exclusively tied to Black and Latino suspects. Carter tried to defend himself, claiming he was merely working high-crime neighborhoods. But statistical control stripped his excuses bare. Commissioner Wright presided firmly, unmoved by appeals to his years of service. "This wasn't one mistake," she said. "This was the one time you got caught." His termination was final. His pension revoked. Criminal charges for assault, perjury, and civil rights violations were filed. But the story did not end with Carter. It became the catalyst for reform. The Oversight Committee, emboldened by the public outrage, demanded sweeping changes. Body cameras with tamper-proof automatic uploads were mandated. Civilian review boards gained enforcement power. Arrest data was statistically analyzed for patterns of bias. Police training shifted toward de-escalation and cultural awareness. Prosecutors, once quick to defend questionable arrests, became cautious, reviewing evidence more rigorously. Judges, inspired by Brooks's composure and resolve, adopted his civilian walkthrough practice, observing their courts without robes to see how ordinary citizens were treated. Within months, the results were measurable. Complaints of excessive force dropped by nearly half. Trust between communities and police, long fractured, began to mend in cautious steps. Wrongfully convicted men and women were released, compensated, and, in some cases, welcomed into the very reform efforts that their suffering had inspired. For Carter, the decline was swift and bitter. Shunned by colleagues, abandoned by union allies, and haunted by the endless loop of his public disgrace replaying on television, he faded into obscurity. His arrogance, once a shield, had become his undoing. For Judge Brooks, the incident transformed him into a national figure. At conferences, he spoke not of his own humiliation, but of the opportunity it created to change systems. "This isn't about punishing one officer," he told an audience of judges and lawmakers. "It's about ensuring equal justice under the law." His words resonated because they came not from theory but from lived experience. He had stood where countless others had stood, on the receiving end of prejudice and power abused, and he had chosen dignity, calm, and accountability. 1 year later, the change was visible not just in statistics, but in faces. In the courtroom, new officers testified with cameras proudly displayed, their words precise and careful. In the community, town halls saw officers and residents sit at the same tables, their conversations difficult but honest. And in Brooks's chambers one afternoon, Jordan Clark, once a defendant staring at prison time, now arrived in a suit with a law school textbook under his arm. "I never thought I'd be here," he admitted, "not studying law, not after what happened." Brooks smiled, seeing in the young man the proof of why reform mattered. The story of Officer Carter was no longer about one man's downfall. It was about a system confronted, a mirror held up to its failures, and a chance, fragile but real, to build something